Administering ads, drops, and withdrawals featuring training officer Benedict Dorsey.
Welcome to the session administering adds, drops, and withdrawals. Before we begin, I'd like to explain the meaning behind the title, as many schools may use some of the terminologies here to mean different things. When we refer to an add in this session, we are referring to a student adding an additional class or classes to their coursework for the term, thereby possibly changing the enrollment status. Likewise, for this session, when we use the term drop, we refer to a student who is dropping a class or several classes without fully withdrawing, thereby possibly changing their enrollment status. When we use the term withdrawal, we are indicating that the student has fully withdrawn from all coursework within the term and ceases to be enrolled. Here are the topics I will be covering for you today in the order listed. First, I will be providing an overview that will lay the foundation for much of what we are here to discuss, primarily the essentials as they pertain to adds and drops, and how they may or may not necessitate a Pell recalculation. After that, we will go into details on how Pell recalculations are administered in a module environment. Following that, we will then discuss how adds and drops may affect a student direct loan. We will then discuss the definition and foundational basics of withdrawals. From there, we will finish up with how a withdrawal is determined based on whether or not a school is required to take attendance, and some principles and deadlines that apply to each school type. Add and drops Pell recalculation overview. Let's begin with our foundational overview as it pertains to adds and drops and how they will affect a Pell award. Mandatory Pell Grant recalculations. Our topic here is not just Pell recalculations, but instances in which a Pell recalculation is a must, regardless of your school's Pell recalculation policy. The first instance is in the event a student's EFC changes during the award year. It may be that a correction or allowable adjustment to the student's data is made. Regardless of the reason, it should be noted that if an EFC does change, it affects the entire award year and may require a Pell recalculation if the change enters into a threshold changing Pell eligibility for any dollar amount. Now, the second instance of a required Pell recalculation occurrence is if the student's enrollment changes between terms and is different from what was anticipated. The same bullet is very similar in what we will say in the next bullet and the sub bullet, which is to say that regardless of what your student may have initially anticipated for enrollment, your school cannot disperse Pell for credits in which the student did not begin attendance. This includes early disbursements as well. For example, even if you disperse Pell funds for a full-time enrolled student prior to the term start, if your student never begins attending all credits establishing full-time status, you must, let me repeat that, you must recalculate the Pell Award based on the enrollment status established by those classes the student actually began attendance. Okay, next slide here. We begin our discussion as it pertains to the school's own policy in establishing a Pell recalculation date, also referred to as the PRD throughout this session. This is to say that a school has the option to establish a time frame for students to add or drop classes to determine a student's enrollment status for Pell awarding purposes. Now, y'all, please note very carefully what we say in this next bullet, as it is where many schools make the error of calling this date by another name and erroneously apply the enrollment status established on the PRD to other Title IV aid programs. For instance, by simply referring to the PRD as the freeze date or census date or drop and add date, schools often forget that they do not have the option of using this date as a means of determining enrollment status for other programs. Generally, other Title IV programs must establish the enrollment status just prior to disbursement. For this purpose, we want to re emphasize the need to call this a PRD, not a census date or freeze date or any other name you may refer to it by, as it is only the Pell Grant Fund that can have an established date in accordance with the school's policies that allows a school to determine the enrollment status. Here we will discuss the various options available to schools when establishing a Pell recalculation policy. The first thing that a school establish a policy that says every time a student adds or drops a class throughout the term, a Pell recalculation must occur. Now, this is rare as it tends to be very labor intensive. We discovered that some schools was under the impression that if they do not have a policy, that this option is the default procedure. We are here to tell you that this is not true, that a school must establish a specific policy for this to occur. Now, the second instance is what most here today may be using, which is to establish a Pell recalculation date based on the enrollment status from a single fixed date. Some schools will often align this date with a census date established within their state, hence the use of census date when referring to a PRD. And here's our final option. Our final option pertains to specific rules schools must adhere to when administering a Pell recalculation policy in a term containing modules. It is the second and third option mentioned here that we will spend some time discussing in details over the course of this session. Let's begin by looking at a few scenarios pertaining to a PRD established on a fixed date within a term. Here we have a hometown community college. You're going to hear about hometown community college a lot today, with a fall term start of August the 13th and a Pell recalculation date of August the 31st. Let's look at our first student, Sarah. She begins attendance with 6 credit hours, but adds an additional course for 3 credit hours on August the 22nd. Because she added the additional 3 credit hour class prior to the PRD, Sarah is enrolled for 3/4 time for Pell purposes. Then our second student begins attendance with 12 credit hours, but drops 2 courses for a total of 6 credit hours on August the 24th. Since Ben dropped the 2 classes prior to the PRD, he is no longer enrolled full time, but is enrolled half time for Pell purposes. Now, using the same setup from the previous page with that hometown community college, we have a start date of August the 13th with a PRD on August the 31st. Now, in the first scenario, Gracie begins attendance with 6 credit hours, but adds an additional course for 3 credit hours on September the 4th. Because Gracie added the class after the PRD, she is still enrolled as a half-time student with 6 credit hours. And there's another student on the slide, Joshua. He begins attendance as a full-time student, but drops 2 courses for a total of 6 credit hours on September the 6th. Because Joshua dropped the courses after the PRD of August the 31st, he still receives the full-time status Pell. In the next couple of slides, we will be discussing what occurs when the student withdraws prior to the Pell recalculation date. As stated here, you must use the enrollment status established on the earliest of the date of withdrawal or PRD. And what I mean by that is this. If a student withdraws prior to the PRD, you must use the enrollment status for the student at the time of withdrawal when determining Pell eligibility. However, if the student withdraws after the PRD, you must use the enrollment status at the time of the PRD when determining eligibility. In the second bullet here, we are noting why this is important as the student may have added a course after the PRD. So you want to make sure you do not give the student enrollment status credit for any classes enrolled in after the PRD. This is why you do not use the withdrawal date enrollment status in such cases. Now that we have given you an overview of withdrawals and PRD, let's look at a few examples to demonstrate this concept. Again, we have Hometown Community College with a fall term start of August the 13th and a PRD of August the 31st. And our first student, Alyssa, began attending 6 credit hours but withdrew on August the 21st prior to our PRD of August 31st. As such, we must take the enrollment status of 6 credit hours at the time of withdrawal to determine Pell eligibility. Our next student is Kelsey. Kelsey begins attendance with 6 credit hours, then dropped 3 credit hours on August the 20th. She is not yet fully withdrawn at this time, but she does drop her final course of 3 credits on August the 27th prior to the PRD. August the 27th is her withdrawal date, and she is only enrolled in 3 credit hours at that time. So her enrollment status is 3 credit hours for Pell purposes. And our last student on this slide, Scott, begins attendance with 6 credit hours, but adds 2 courses for an additional 6 credit hours on September the 6th. Notice how these courses was added after the PRD and that they would not otherwise be added to his enrollment status even if he had not withdrawn. Unfortunately, sad to say, Scott does eventually withdraw after the PRD on October the 10th. Again, since he withdrew after the PRD, his enrollment status for Pell purposes is what was established on the PRD and not at the time of withdrawal. In this case, it is for 6 credit hours. Let's talk about post-PRD initial enrollment. Before discussing our next topic on post-PRD initial enrollment, we need to first understand the concept of an initial Pell calculation. Essentially, an initial Pell calculation cannot occur before 2 components are existent. That is, the school must have an ICER with official EFC, and the school must, and the student must be enrolled. A Pell recalculation date assumes that an initial Pell recalculation took place prior to the PRD. As such, there may be instances wherein a student might either enroll or an official ICER is received after the PRD. Now, generally, an initial enrollment would not occur prior to a PRD. But for schools that offer modules, it is a common occurrence if the school is using a single fixed Pell recalculation date near the beginning of the term. That being said, when a student's initial enrollment occurs to complete an initial Pell calculation, the school must use the enrollment status from the later of the PRD or when the school is able to perform the initial Pell calculation. Okay, let's stop to take a look at a couple of examples because that was a mouthful what I said a few minutes ago of how this will play out to deepen our understanding of this concept. In this scenario, again, Hometown Community College has a term beginning August the 15th with a single fixed PRD on August the 31st. It's important to note in this scenario is that in addition to full-length courses, there are also shorter courses within the term. referred to as modules. Now that the stage is set, let's look at our first student. Paul does not enroll in any courses until well after the PRD of August the 31st, but he enrolls for the first time on September the 15th for two module courses beginning on October the 1st for 6 credit hours. Because an initial Pell calculation does not occur until after the PRD, we must use the enrollment status at the time of the initial Pell calculation. The latter of the two dates between PRD and initial Pell calculation. That means Paul is enrolled for 6 credit hours for Pell purposes. Again, here we are using the same setup with a single fixed PRD of August the 31st. Like before, we also have full-length courses as well as modules within the term. Our student, John, in this scenario, begins attendance at the start of the term with an initial enrollment of 6 credit hours. The PRD of August the 31st passes, and John enrolls in a module course on October the 1st. In this case, the initial Pell calculation occurred prior to the PRD because the student was already enrolled at the beginning of the term. That means the latter of the initial Pell calculation and the PRD is the Pell recalculation date of August the 31st, meaning the additional course added after the PRD does not count towards John's enrollment status, leaving him with the 6 credit hours enrolled and at the beginning of the term for Pell purposes. These next slides continue with the same concept of an initial Pell calculation not occurring until after the student is both enrolled and the school has received an official ICER for the student. There are some instances wherein a student may enroll but they do not complete the FAFSA, or an ICER with an official EFC is not received until after the PRD. This means the initial Pell calculation cannot occur until after the PRD. So just like our previous scenarios, we must use the enrollment status from the later of the PRD and the initial Pell calculation. Again, let's look at some scenarios to help us understand this concept more. Here we have a hometown community college with a fall term start of August the 15th and a PRD of August the 31st. Our first student, David, is enrolled at the beginning of the term for 12 credit hours, but did not fill out the FAFSA until September the 2nd. On September the 5th, well after the PRD, the school received the official ICER. In this case, we will use the enrollment status on the date of the initial Pell calculation since it is later than the PRD. David is still enrolled for 12 credit hours at the time of the initial Pell calculation, so he is eligible for a full-time Pell. Following to the next slide, again, we are looking at the same setup for hometown community college with a PRD August the 31st. We have Bruce's scenario. Bruce is enrolled in 12 credit hours at the term start, but did not complete the FAFSA before the PRD of August the 31st. It's important to note is that Bruce drops a class for 3 credit hours on September the 10th, bringing him down to enrollment status of 9 credit hours. Then on September the 15th, Bruce completes the FAFSA, and the school receives an official ICER on September the 17th. Since the initial Pell calculation could not occur until September the 17th after the PRD, we must take the enrollment status on that date, which is for 9 credit hours. Please note that despite Bruce's enrollment status of 12 credits at the time of the PRD, we must use only 9 credit hours because the initial Pell calculation is the later date and it must be used. Okay, on this slide, we're going to talk about administering Pell Grant recalculations for modules. In this segment, we provide specific details on how to administer a Pell recalculation in a term that contains modules. The distance education final regulation, this is a news flash. The distance education final regulation, which may impact return to Title IV recalculation for module, it just came out in September. It goes into effect on July the 1st, 2021. These new regulations will be discussed in another session during the conference. Please look for it. When a school has modules within the term, the department has provided guidance that allows the school to assign a PRD to each module within a term. However, each of the assigned PRDs does not become active until the student begins attending the corresponding module. Subsequently, if the student does not begin attendance in a PRD assigned module, the school must use the latest active PRD to determine enrollment status for Pell purposes. Also noted here in the final bullet is that when a PRD is activated, all courses within the payment period are considered when determining the enrollment status. We will give you some examples next to show you how this works. For our first scenario, we got a nice little chart there or graph there. For our first scenario in this environment, you can see here the Hometown Community College has assigned a PRD for the full term classes as well as for the two existing modules. Remember, the 9-4 PRD assigned to the full term courses does not activate unless the student begins attendance in a full term course. Likewise, if a student does not begin attendance in Module 1, the 821 PRD does not activate. And if a student does not begin attendance in Module 2, the 1022 PRD does not activate. For our first scenario in this environment, we have Jesse, who is scheduled to attend 6 credits in the full term courses, 3 credits in Module 1 and 3 credits in Module 2. On September the 5th, he drops 3 credits for a full term course. And then, after beginning attendance in Module 2, he drops the Module 2 course for 3 credits on October the 20th. Since he began attendance in Module 2, the Module 2 PRD of October the 22nd was activated. Prior to the 1022 PRD, Jesse dropped 6 credits to the scheduled 12 credits, leaving him with only 6 credits to be counted towards his enrollment status for Pell purposes. Continuing with PRDs and modules, in this scenario, we have Michelle, who is also scheduled for 6 credit hours in the full term courses, 3 credits in Module 1 and 3 credits in Module 2 for a total of 12 scheduled credit hours for the term. On September the 5th, she drops one of the full term courses for 3 credit hours. Please note how this is after the full term course PRD of September the 4th. When Module 2 starts, Michelle never begins attendance in that module. Since she never began attendance in Module 2, the PRD of 1022 was never activated. That means we must use the 9-4 PRD, which is the last PRD that was activated. Notice here how Michelle gets credit for 9 credit hours. She received all 6 credits for the full term courses because she didn't drop a full-time course until after the 9-4 PRD. However, because she never began attendance in Module 2, she does not get credit for the 3 credit hours scheduled for that module. Adds and drops and direct loans. Up to this point, we have specifically addressed how a Pell Award is affected when a student adds or drops a class within a term. Next, we will discuss how direct loans are affected and approached in a very different way when a student adds or drops a course within a term. The first thing you should know is that PRDs have no relevance when determining the enrollment status for direct loans. The department has issued long-standing guidance that a school must determine eligibility at the time of disbursement. This is to mean that you should be using the enrollment status established at the time of disbursement. Remember, unlike Pell, the student must be enrolled at least half-time and started at least one class to be eligible for the direct loan disbursement. The key factor here is enrollment status at the time of disbursement. As such, your school must have a process to confirm enrollment status prior to disbursement. When it comes to early disbursements for direct loans, you must ensure at the time of disbursement that the student is enrolled at least half time. This can be done as early as 10 days prior to the enrollment start date. If after you have dispersed and the student begins attendance at less than half-time enrolled student, the student is still eligible to retain the disbursement. However, since the student is enrolled less than half-time, a subsequent disbursement scheduled during that term cannot be made unless the student reestablishes at least half-time status. Remember, if the student retains the funds accordingly and is less than half-time henceforth, we don't expect the student to return the funds immediately, as they will be able to repay the loan in accordance with the terms and conditions of the MPN. The exception to funds have to be returned immediately is only in the event that the student fully withdraw and the school is responsible for the return of direct loan funds as a result of a return to Title IV calculation. Let me continue on with early disbursement. If at the time you disperse direct loan funds prior to a term start and the student does not begin attendance in any of their scheduled classes, the school must return any direct loan funds credited to the student's account. If there are any remaining funds dispersed directly to the student, the school must notify the appropriate loan servicer of the outstanding loans funds so a 30-day demand letter can be sent to the student. In this case, note that the student does not get to repay the loan in accordance with the terms and the conditions of the loan. Withdrawal dates. In this next section, we will discuss the definition and basic principles as it pertains to withdrawals when the student ceases to attend all classes prior to the completion of a term. As noted at the very beginning of this session, the department defines a withdrawal for credit hour programs as when the student does not complete all of the scheduled days in the payment period or period of enrollment. We have provided the clock hour definition here, as well as those students who do not complete all of the scheduled hours within the payment period or period of enrollment. Let's look at the next slide. When a student is considered withdrawn. For non-term and non-standard term programs, there is a special rule that says a student is withdrawn if the student is not scheduled to begin another course within the same payment period for more than 45 days after the end of the module the student ceased attending. The exception to this rule is if the student is on an approved leave of absence. When a student is considered withdrawn, it is important to note that schools must be acutely aware of which courses are Title IV eligible and which ones are not. Here we have just one of the reasons as to why, and that is if a student drops all of his or her Title IV eligible courses but remains enrolled in a non-Title IV course, the student is considered withdrawn and an R2T4 calculation must be done. For schools required to take attendance. Here we will discuss withdrawal determination and principles that must be adhered to as it pertains to schools required to take attendance. Institutions required to take attendance. Right here, we define which schools are required to take attendance. If an outside agency requires you to take attendance, such as an accrediting agency, then you are a school that is required to take attendance. Likewise, if an outside agency has a requirement that only be met by taking attendance, such as needed contact hours for certification purposes, then you are a school that is required to take attendance. One that many schools miss is when an outside agency does not require you to take attendance for any reason, but the school has a policy wherein instructors are required to take attendance. Then such a school is required to take attendance. Institution required to take attendance. Let's continue with that. Why we differentiate between required to take attendance and not required to take attendance is because, however, your school falls in each of these two categories will determine how you will determine the withdrawal date for your student. For schools that are required to take attendance, you must always use the official attendance record to determine the withdrawal date. As such, the last date of attendance must be the withdrawal date. Schools not required to take attendance. We will discuss withdrawal dates determination and principles as they pertain to schools not required to take attendance. To determine if your school is not required to take attendance is very simple. If you are not required by an outside agency to take attendance and your school has not required instructors to take attendance as a matter of policy, then your school is not required to take attendance. Most traditional credit hour schools fall under this category. Withdrawal dates and official notification. For schools that are not required to take attendance, there are different ways to determine the withdrawal date depending upon the circumstances. Here we discuss what is called an official withdrawal. An official withdrawal will occur when a student goes through the school's official withdrawal process. The withdrawal date is when the student began the official withdrawal process. Please pay special attention to this distinction as the student may indicate on a form when he or she will withdraw. But for Title IV purpose, we require that you use the date the student began the withdrawal process. There is also what we indicate as a student otherwise provides official notification of withdrawal. This is when the student does not necessarily go through the school's official process, but instead provides notice to a designated school official that he or she will withdraw. This can be done either in writing or orally. If orally, the school must document the notification. Either way, the withdrawal date is when the student notified the school of withdrawal. In some instances, you will find that some students will notify the school of withdrawal and then later begin the official withdrawal process. If this occurs, you must use the earlier of the two dates as the withdrawal date. There are some special circumstances. There are other times when the student does not officially withdraw, but special circumstances beyond the student's control can warrant a withdrawal. Here we show some examples, such as an illness or an accident that prohibits the student from continuing attendance. In these cases, the withdrawal date can be the date the circumstances occur. However, if the student continues attendance that is demonstrated through an academic related activity, then a later date could be used. Also, if there is an administrative withdrawal wherein the student enrollment is terminated by the school for some of the reasons listed here, in this case, the withdrawal date is the date the school terminates enrollment. Withdrawal date, student dies. Also, there is the unfortunate situation wherein the student dies before the completion of the term. For obvious reasons, this constitutes the need for withdrawal, and the withdrawal date must be determined by the school as on the basis of when the circumstances occurred that caused the death. Just know that the withdrawal date can be no later than the date of the student's death. Unofficial withdrawals. If none of the previous examples of withdrawals occur and the student withdraws without providing notification, the school is then able to use the midpoint of the payment period as the withdrawal date. Withdrawal dates, academic related activity. In this slide, we point out that the school may use an academically related activity as the withdrawal date in lieu of the withdrawal dates discussed so far. If the school decides to use an academic related activity as the withdrawal date, they must document the activity as academically related in the student's attendance at that activity. Academically related activities. Here we provide a listing of just some of the academic related activities a school might use as the withdrawal date. Perhaps some stick out to you that you can use at your school, such as a date the student submitted an academic assignment or the date the student took an exam. Also note for online classes, it may be the date the student participated in an online discussion about academic matters. Here we provide a list of what cannot, let me say again, cannot be counted as an academic related activity to determine a withdrawal date. Notice for the online classes, simply signing into an online class does not constitute an academic related activity if the student did not provide active participation during that time. Also, the student living in housing at the school or participating in a meal plan at the school does not constitute an academic related activity. And finally, if a student participates in an academic counseling or advisement, it does not constitute an academic related activity. I know, yes, there was a time many years ago when this was permitted, but no more. Let's talk about if a student fails to earn a passing grade. Here we discuss a student who begins attending, does not officially withdraw, but fails to earn a passing grade in at least one of the courses offered during the period. In these cases, the school must assume for Title IV purposes that the student has unofficially withdrawn unless the school can specifically document that the student completed the period. Date of determination. In this segment, we will discuss the date of determination, how it differs from a withdrawal date, and what it is used for. Our final topic of discussion is the date of determination. The date of determination, as noted here, is the date the school becomes aware that a student ceased attendance. The date of determination is important because it sets the precedence for when the countdown for deadlines begin. As you will soon see, I'm going to talk about it in a second. For those students who provide notification of withdrawal, you will use the date of notification as the date of withdrawal unless the actual withdrawal date is later due to perhaps an academic related activity. In such cases, you cannot have the date of determination preceding the actual withdrawal, and you must use the later of either the notification or the withdrawal date as the date of determination. In cases of an unofficial withdrawal at schools required to take attendance, the date of determination can be no later than 14 calendar days after the last date of attendance. In cases of an unofficial withdrawal at schools not required to take attendance, the date of determination can be within 30 days after the end of a payment period, academic year, or student's education program, whichever is earliest of the three. Reminders about deadlines. As noted earlier, it is at the date of determination that the school must begin the countdown to certain deadlines. Here we provide a list of tasks a school must perform within 30 days from the date of determination. Pay special note to the need for an R2T4 calculation to be completed within 30 days while also needing to notify the student of either a grant overpayment or post-withdrawal disbursement eligibility for direct loan and request confirmation. Both of these tasks found in bullet 2 and 3 cannot be determined until completing the R2T4 calculation. As such, it may be wise not to wait until the last minute to complete the calculation to ensure sufficient time is given to complete the task. Here we provide a list of all tasks a school must complete within 45 days from the date of determination. Also of note, here is the need for the school to return Title IV for which it is responsible. Again, if the school waits the full 30 days to complete the R2T4 calculation, this only leaves a remaining 15 days to return the funds to their proper program. Also, the school must make a post-withdrawal disbursement of Title IV grant funds owed directly to the student within this time frame. And finally, the school has within 180 days from the date of determination to make a post-withdrawal grant funds paid against the student's account, as well as the same time frame to make a post-withdrawal disbursement of direct loan funds to either the student or against the student's account. Also, you must remember that before you can make any post-withdrawal disbursement of direct loans, you must first receive confirmation from the student or parent, if it's a plus loan, that they want the disbursement. When it comes to a grant, you don't have to. You can just disperse it. But when it comes to a Title IV loan product, you need the student or parent's confirmation. In conclusion, we would like to show you where you can find the resources substantiating anything I shared with you today. We have two primary resources, the FSA handbook and a listing of federal regulations that will help establish the authority in which you will implement your own policies. Please note the very specific volume and chapters in the FSA handbook for each topic will allow you to glean more specific information. Don't forget to review the distance education final regulation because it may impact return to Title IV recalculation for modules. Again, the new regulation will be discussed in another session during this conference. Thank you for attending this session. I have enjoyed talking to you. If you still have further questions on adds, drops, and withdrawals, I encourage you to make use of our Ask a Fed mailbox where you can send any inquiries for this topic at axafed.ed.gov. Take care.